Points to show for it on the board. 2nd and 5. Again, touchdown. Marty Booker. Doesn't get a bounce. Oh, there's a high hop. It is a pile up inside midfield. Let's see who comes up with the football. Bears ball.
Watch the ball. It does not take a good hop, so no Brown defender can come up and catch it. Now it goes in the air. Percy Ellsworth hits it. Jerry Azuma knocks it out of the hands. Kick.
Bears are out of timeouts.
You gotta take your time.
Steps up, gonna go for it all in the end zone. Jump ball. Caught! It's caught! James Allen was there for the tip.
Shane Matthews stepping up in the pocket, allowed the receivers to get in the end zone, create the tip for the catch by James Allen.
In the lineup now for Cleveland. Couch out of the shotgun. Throws, that's batted into the air. Intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it. Mike Brown has done it again.
Hey Browns, Mike Polk, season ticket holder. Killer game in Houston today.
Well, thank God we built you. What a blessing for the community.
You are wasting valuable space on our majestic shoreline, and what do we get out of it from you? 10 miserable games a year, including 2 preseason games that I have to pay for, and 1 shitty Kenny Chesney concert. Do you understand that it is actually statistically harder for a team to be this consistently bad than it is for them to occasionally accidentally be good? The probability is staggering. Did you happen to see that Packers-Chargers game today? It's like they're playing a different sport than you are. And here's what you have to understand. We don't even expect you to be good. We just want you to be watchable. Do you have any idea how low our expectations are? We don't expect you to win the Super Bowl. We just want you to look better than a Division III high school team. And listen, I know that there are way more important things in life than football, but you are supposed to be our pleasant distraction from those things.
But all we do is pay you money to put us in a bad mood every week.
You are a factory of sadness! I'll see you Sunday.
Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise Podcast. It's time to remember this crap with Mike Donahue. Mike, how are you?
Good, Andy. How are you?
I'm terrific. Bears are on a 1-game winning streak. They don't have a redheaded quarterback anymore, and they're off to play their former preseason arch rivals, the Cleveland Browns.
I'm not even sure what you're referring to, but I will tell you that I will tell you that the Browns are one of the few teams I've not seen in person in a regular season game, but I did see them in preseason. But you're referencing something that I'm not quite grasping.
For many years, up until recently, for whatever reason, the Bears and Browns seem to always play the last preseason game against each other, the one nobody ever wanted to go to.
I just block out preseason games. I didn't even know that.
I was thinking of that when I was looking at the, so these are old franchises, right? The Browns go back.
Yep.
Do you know how many times they've played?
Well, I have a guess because I was pondering it after playing the Bengals and, realizing that because they're in the AFC, they nowadays can only play every 4 years. Used to be every 3 years, but I would almost guess that they haven't played the Browns that much more than the Bengals, in spite of the fact that they predate the AFL and they've been in the NFL since 1950. There's not much history there.
So the Bears and Bengals, that was the 12th matchup. Was that right? On Sunday?
I believe that's correct.
Because I think the Bears had a 6-5-0 advantage, which they pushed to 7-5-0. There's the Browns and Bears have played more but not a lot more.
Less
This will
than
be
20,
the
right?
17th time.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because we don't.
Well, and for whatever reason, they only played once in the 70s.
Well, they only played the Bengals once in the 70s, so I'm still trying to figure out
Who'd
what
they
was
play
going
in
on
the
with the
70s?
schedule. Well, as well as and we talked about this, as well as I had the schematic, the formula down for how schedules work beginning in '79 with a 28 team league and a 16 game schedule. It was very logical, somewhat. I can't account for how they did it in the 70s. I can only tell you that they played the Bengals one time, and I'm guessing the Browns one time, maybe the Steelers one time. I mean, were they playing the Raiders a lot? I don't know. I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, but for some reason or another, they haven't played. They didn't play AFC Central teams, the four team conference, 4-team division. I'm sorry, I should say, and that's also funny because Cleveland and Pittsburgh, of course, were two of the old NFL teams that joined all of the nascent formerly AFL teams that currently, that comprise the American Football Conference. So at least since the 1970 season, I guess they haven't had a lot of cause to meet that often, but the Bears don't have much history with either the Browns and the Steelers. They go back further with the Browns, but the reason they don't have a history with the Browns is the Steelers. The Bears don't have much of a history with the Steelers, even though they go back to 1920 and Hallis loaning money to Art Rooney winning money on a horse at the horse track and buying the Steelers. That the Steelers were so historically perennially awful for about right before the Super Bowl era. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that when we cover Pittsburgh. So, but it is odd. It's odd that the Bears and Browns, they have a very storied decade that were actually subsequent to one another. Bears in the 40s, Browns in the 50s. They go back, but they very rarely cross paths. But there are a lot of similarities.
So do you know who leads the series? It's
It's
close, so I guess it's a crapshoot.
Yeah, I don't know.
9 and 7.
I'm going to guess the Browns.
The Browns. Although the Bears have won 3 in a row and 4 out of 5.
Is that right?
Yes.
So what's interesting about kind of diving into the Browns, Andy, a week after doing the Bengals is I know that you've talked about this before. This is remember this crap, not research this crap. But subsequent to the show we did last week, I'm discussing Paul Brown. I sort of found myself going down the Wikipedia rabbit hole and learned a few things. And I thought, since we're in this sort of continuation, we're kind of in the Paul Brown series. I wanted to sort of drill a little bit deeper because you made a couple of observations that I thought were spot on. But then also the one thing that was spot on that you came across was the parallels between the current day Brown family and the current day descendants of George Hallis. And that's as it pertains to the Bengals more so than the Browns.
Yes.
And that's completely valid. And it's also valid about how
the Browns are now owned by truck stop magnate magnate. I mean, you can get a magnet at a truck stop.
Sure.
Jimmy Haslam.
Oh, that's right. I didn't know he was a truck stop. So he's like TNA or what's some of the
Flying J.
Oh yeah, I know the Flying J. I've seen a few of those in Michigan. Okay, no, but and actually that's going to get me to my point too. The one discovery I made. So that was a good observation. The other one of he's kind of a little bit of a George Hallis type in his own right. Another good observation. But then one thing that I made the discovery, and I felt it was appropriate to set the record straight because it's kind of opens up the world to a more fascinating tale, is that in fact Paul Brown, unlike what we both assumed, and a lot of people did, much like George Hallis, was the owner of the Cleveland Browns. And he never really was. It's just, it's funny because you think, well, they're named the Browns, this and that. And we kind of assume it to be like Hallis. Hallis' story.
Weren't they named in honor of him?
Well, that's it. So Paul Brown grew up in Ohio, born in 1908. He played football, was around in the 20s when he was a kid, Massillon, Washington High School. And then he enrolls at Ohio State, but he's too small to play quarterback. He transfers to Miami of Ohio, and he plays a lot alongside Weeb Eubank at Miami of Ohio. He graduates, and then he goes into coaching high school football at his alma mater and turns him into this powerhouse. I think that at one point he went 80 wins, 8 losses, and 1 tie. And the Ohio State University, in a controversial move that was actually somewhat presaged a few decades later by Notre Dame hiring another Ohio football legend in high school, Jerry Faust.
God, yes.
But Ohio State hired this Paul Brown character, who then led the university to the school's first ever national title in his second season, 42. He ends up when World War II is going on. He gets assigned as a lieutenant, and then he's out at North Chicago at the Great Lakes Naval Base, coaching that team where George Halas had played for that team in the 1918 Rose Bowl, and he was the MVP. Halas, just by comparison's sake, and for any Bears fans that might not know it, and sometimes I forget it, but Halas himself was, he was the son of immigrants from the west side of Chicago, born in 1895. He's 13 years older than Paul Brown, but obviously a special individual, a smart guy. He graduates from Illinois where he plays football, gets a degree in civil engineering, and then he enlists, or he goes into the Naval Reserves. He plays for Great Lakes, like I said, plays in the 1918 Rose Bowl, becomes MVP. The next year he's playing a few games in right field for the New York Yankees, of course. There's a baseball reference page for George Halas. He himself propagated the myth that Babe Ruth succeeded him, but anybody that has access to baseball reference will see that George Staley Halas is 2 for 22. 1919 didn't really make him their right fielder. Nevertheless, a year after that, when he's only 25, he's playing football, working for A.E. Staley, a grain manufacturer downstate in Decatur, and blah, blah, blah. And whatever savings or loans he took out, Halas cobbled together enough to sort of buy in and then sort of buy out Staley. And he was the outright owner, even though obviously it was a different playing field because in 1921, he's buying low. The NFL is still kind of a rogue league, but whatever resource Halas had, he was the outright owner, at the age of like 26, and the rest is history. Built the wealth there. Paul Brown, a little bit different, despite having some similarities and playing, coaching the Great Lakes. But at this point, when the war ends and he's supposed to go back to Ohio State because he was on leave for Great Lakes, he's, at this point, Paul Brown's 37, 38, but then he takes up this offer by this taxi cab magnate, a character named Mickey McBride, who was born in Chicago and may have had mob connections. He was the owner, he was the financer, but he did. He rallied around Brown's image. Brown was already a legend. He was a high school legend. He leads Ohio State to the title. So Brown managed to build on that sort of his own brand and also had enough to buy in for 15%, but he was never more than a 15% owner in the Browns. Just to wrap up this long-winded history, but I did find it interesting. McBride sold the Browns after like the 53 season, and at this point Brown had won four AAFC titles. He had already won 2 NFL titles. He took the league by storm after they joined. The Browns played in 6 straight championship games as soon as they joined the NFL. They were a powerhouse. Brown was a legend, and he did sort of leverage his position, even with change of ownership. They changed ownership again in 61 when Art Modell, a 35-year-old New York ad man, acquired the team, and Modell gave Paul Brown an 8-year contract, and but fired him 2 years later and bought him out for $500,000. And so he was in exile for 5 years. Played a lot of golf, and I think the Wikipedia article points out that Brown. It was said that only Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer made more money playing golf. So he did build his wealth, and he bought back into the Rams for, I think, a 30% share. And eventually they were able to, he got up to that Halas level, but it was a slightly different history. And I just thought it was worth mentioning because I found it pretty interesting. They have his name, but he never was in fact really the primary owner, but he was obviously a larger than life presence that, kind of accounted for all that.
It's a terrible nickname.
It is. It's the worst color. On the spectrum.
So I think 2 of the worst nicknames if you actually sit and think about what they are. The Browns, which is a color. Yeah, Packers? Can you guess the other one?
Is it Packers?
Well, the Packers that's pretty dumb.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, what did you have in mind?
The White Sox.
Okay.
White Sox.
At least that's
your nickname? Yeah, at least the Red Sox, it's a color.
Not the absence.
Calling yourself after Sox is dumb. I mean, of course, we had the Cincinnati Reds.
Red stockings at one point when they didn't want to be labeled
communist. Right, that was during the communist scare. That was the only reason they added stockings.
But you're right.
There's a lot of dumb stuff. Yeah,
in the olden days.
Now,
but yeah, Browns, and I don't know, like if Brown, there is a little bit ambiguous as to whether or not he truly did not have the ego and was humbled and didn't want them to be the Browns. That's one story. Or maybe he passive aggressively played behind the scenes and manipulated so he could get that glory. But he was on record as being against the name, as it turns out.
Well, that's weird. I mean,
you kind of believe your own bullshit.
There was probably a time when you could have got enough meatball Bear fans to go, I think it would be a good idea to be the Ditkus. I mean, come on. He's a Hall of Fame player. He's a Hall of Fame coach. He won a Super Bowl.
The fighting Ditkus. It's like the leprechaun, but Ditkus.
He gave me an angioplasty in the back of the steakhouse. At least that's what he called it.
Well, so the Bears
now angioplasty. I'll write that up. That could be a character in season 2 of Chicago Party.
Party Ant. Yeah, exactly.
She runs a bar. Angioplasty runs a bar.
That's a free one. If they're listening, they can have it.
You can have that one for free.
That's good. It's funny that the Decatur, and then for 1 year the Chicago Staleys. It's funny that George Halas's middle name is Staley, right? But that's a coincidence because it was A.E. Staley was the grain titan.
Is it Staley or is it Stanley? I always thought it was Stanley.
Is it George Stanley here? I mean, that's maybe one of those things that I just couldn't ever get straight for whatever.
Yeah, it's Stanley.
It is Stanley.
Well, the N is silent.
Thank you. Right. I'm going to call him Staley. I'm gonna ignore A.E. Staley, downstate grain magnate or whatever he was, and assign that to Papa Bear.
He was just some asshole who owned a grain elevator and had a little spare cash, and he sponsored a football team. I mean, it's funny how the NFL, like the Acme Packers and the Decatur Staleys, it would be like it's like now going to get a sponsor for a softball team.
Right, company softball.
That's exactly what they were doing.
I know it was.
Chico,
it was.
We were this close to having the Bears having to fly out to California to go play Chico's bail bond.
That's a matchup I'd like to see with with Butterfinger in the dugout.
That's
true.
Butterfinger's a different thing. Yeah. Well, now that they already have, which I think is the dumbest thing. Talk about a ridiculous sponsorship. You can sponsor a patch on their practice jerseys.
Like NASCAR? On practice jerseys.
On Bears practice jerseys. How many people see that?
Right. The whole point of that would be exposure.
I mean, they're getting to the point where the NBA's got it. Baseball's been talking about it. And if I had a lot of money, just to be fun, like I would, even if I would pay to have somebody wear Chico's bail bonds on their jersey. Just because. Just if I had just enough money. I was like, this will be funny. Here's a patch. Here's your $4 million, whatever it is, for the season. Right. You're going to wear this patch.
Just burn it. I like it.
To me, there's a lot of parallels between the teams, and they're mostly bad. Greatest quarterback in Browns history?
So I actually did look this up. I've kind of had a little bit of a hobby in and I don't have it mentally cataloged, but we already know that Jay Cutler just recently became the all-time Bears passer. But even then, he ranks down there. Oddly enough, Brian Sipe, who's the answer I know, is only about 400 yards more than Cutler. Is right because Cutler was like 23, 723 or 423. I think Brian Sipe is 23, 723. That's a total parallel. And by the way, there's only one franchise whose all-time leading passer has fewer yards than Cutler, and it's Houston with Matt Schaub, and that's only like 300 yards.
Yeah, because the franchise is like 4 months old.
Well, that hasn't stopped, the Ravens and.
Oh, we talked about it during one of the podcasts when they played the Texans last year. Yeah,
they did. Yeah, and finally
about how Andre Johnson is their leading receiver and has like 3 times the receiving yards Johnny Morris does.
Which, yeah, and so I think too that like it's kind of like you and I have talked about how much attention was paid to the Cubs having had a black hole at third base between Madlock and Ramirez, or some would say Santo and Bryant because they're morons, but really the greater hole has been center field. I'm not going to say this is greater than quarterback, but now that Cutler has actually eclipsed Sid Luckman, it is so unbelievably absurd that the all-time leading in Bears receiving yards has just barely over 5,000 yards.
Yeah,
it's probably just barely alive.
Yeah, well,
I mean, not to be mean to old Johnny Morris, but like most teams' receivers all-time have occurred in the last 20 years only, it seems. And even then, with that head start,
there's
the Bears.
No, well, my parallel was going to be Brian Sipe and Jay Cutler. It was going to Otto Graham and Sid Luckman.
Was Otto Graham is he their second leading passer?
I don't know, but he's easily the greatest quarterback in Browns history.
Yes, for sure.
Just like Sid Luckman is still the greatest quarterback in
Bears
history.
Even though Cutler, right? Well,
so,
yeah, because of the championships. Because statistically, Cutler's better, obviously, than Luckman.
You can't. I mean, I wasn't alive. I barely was alive to see Sid be alive, much less to see Sid
but
play.
He obviously had to be awesome because they dominated in one Well, so I want to quickly just highlight that how interesting it is there. We're going to make plenty of comparisons because we haven't even gotten to who the Browns wide receiver is, which is kind of equally embarrassing in some contexts.
Oh, I know it is.
Position, but I know
it's not a wide receiver.
But I know, which makes it kind of more embarrassing for them. But just to draw one positive comparison, the Bears won four. They went to the NFL in the 1940s, any decade beginning with four. Beginning in 1940, they won 4 championships in 6 seasons, or 4 championships in 7 seasons. They appeared in 5 championship games in 7 seasons. They were the class of the league, and the Browns were basically what the Bears were the next decade. They went to every championship out of the Eastern Conference from 1950 until 55. 6 years in a row, they went 3-3, just like the Bears. So very dominant there, and then of course, really neither team. Each franchise has won one title since that era. But anyway, back to the Browns' all-time leading receiver, who's not even a wide receiver.
It's Ozzie Newsome.
Right.
He was a great He was a great player, but he should not be an all-time leading receiver.
Well, and imagine what a kick to the balls it is for Browns fans. And not only is it, he's a Hall of Fame tight end, so he's in that conversation with Ditka, John Mackey, Tony Gonzalez, all these modern guys, whatever. He's there. But Ozzie Newsome also is one of the Browns who remained loyal to Art Modell. Yeah. And it worked out for Ozzie, let's say, because he became the Ravens general manager, I want to say, at least for their Super Bowl in 2000. Another kick to the nuts. So their beloved player, their all-time leading receiver, is like a complete Judas for them. I'm not ripping Ozzie. He seems like a good enough guy.
Yeah, well, so yeah, there's the parallels with the quarterbacks. There's parallels with the receiver. There's parallels that both teams have a very rich history that you have to be a historian to remember most of it or to enjoy most of it. The biggest difference is that Ernest Biner never played for the Bears, so they actually went to and won a Super Bowl where the Browns didn't get to go to theirs, although they probably would have got blown out in that Super Bowl. But that's right.
That's true.
So, but then there's the other thing is when you look back at the history. I mean, I get the idea, right? All this stuff happened in Cleveland, but these aren't those Browns. Those Browns are the Ravens.
Well, not according
other than the uniforms and the nickname. They started over. And they've been terrible since they started over. They had this. It's funny because at the time now it's perfect Browns, right? So the cat teams come into the league, the Panthers and the Jags, and they're both good too fast.
Yeah, both go to the
championship game in their second year,
in their second season.
And so when it's like, okay, we got to bring the Browns back.
By themselves in '99,
all the rules so that wouldn't happen again. They made it a million times harder for the Browns to build their team because they were like, well, no, we made the Jags and Panthers too good too fast. So they got screwed again to the point where when they brought the Texans in, They eased up the rules because, like, God, we really fucked the Browns. So we're just happy to have our team back. Well, no, you're not.
The Browns were the dead canary in the coal mine for like whatever adjustments they were trying to make before they. Wow.
I mean, really, what they got out of Art leaving was they got a new stadium that they don't seem to like, just like New Soldier Field.
Another parallel.
Absolutely. The Factory of Sadness right down there on the river.
Factory of Sadness.
Have you ever seen that video? The guy yelling at the stadium? I'll put it at the
I may have.
It's one of the great.
Maybe if it's worthwhile, post.
Oh, it is.
One of the,
he's a comedian who is a big Brown fan, and he argues something about I shouldn't try to recreate this. I'll put it at the beginning, but basically, like, look, I know I'm not supposed to be complaining about football because football is not as important as the things in life, but you are supposed to be a distraction from those things. Instead, you are a factory of sadness.
That's great.
It's great.
So basically expressing universal pain that a lot of us, especially those of us that have rooted for the Bears and the Cubs, and I think there are certain franchises in particular.
The biggest difference between the Bears and the Browns is that we can cling to 1985,
a Super Bowl. That's the
and
only
they
difference.
Can't.
That's right.
Theirs never happened.
That's it. And they've never. Yep. They're one of those surprisingly strong number of. Or high number of teams that are much more laughable than the Bears in the last 50 years and in just the whole span of the NFL. But even if you draw it to 50 years, we've got the edge on the Browns. The Browns and Lions are I'm pretty sure the only two NFL teams that existed before the merger that haven't played in the Super Bowl. I haven't looked that up, but it's got to be the case.
Yeah, because even the Cardinals went.
Yes, just once, but yeah, Cardinals have been slightly more competent. So,
man, that's a rough
well,
pill to swallow.
We'll get to that this year.
The Cardinals have been more confident than your franchise.
That'll be a fun one. Okay, one other parallel in the positive direction again. So the negatives are. Cutler is the Bear. Basically, it's not from what era that is since Luckman's been passed, but the negative is that they have, I believe, 2 of the 3 lowest all-time passing yards, and they're probably the bottom 2 receiving yards, right? Because I don't think I completed my research, but I don't know of any other team that is their all-time leading receiver someone with fewer than 10,000 yards besides the.
I think I looked because I was trying to.
Because Ozzie had like 8,000, right?
I don't even know if he got to 8. I get 7 something.
Okay.
Yeah, they're the only 2 that are close to that low.
But then another positive parallel is that they had 2 of the greatest running backs in the NFL. So there you go. It was Jim Brown's record that Walter Payton broke in 1984. So there's that. It is funny that
Jim Brown, the actor, he played football.
Jim Brown, the actor, yeah,
for the Dirty Dozen. I didn't even know
the
that.
very one. In 48 hours, I think. I might have that wrong.
He's in Any Given Sunday, too.
Is that right?
You think Oliver Stone's going to make a football movie and not put Jim Brown in it? He's in Draft Day.
Oh,
Him and Bernie Kosar both. They show up at the end.
Bernie Kosar. Well, there's another Brown. Yeah, well, that's why they brought it up, because it centers around the Browns.
So, Jim Brown is, you have to say arguably, because somebody can argue about it, the greatest player of all time.
Who, oddly enough, never won a championship with the Browns, because Paul Brown won all those titles before he got Jim Brown. Brown had a great but short career, and then they won one more title with Leroy Kelly right after he retired. But yeah, no doubt, Brown only played 9 seasons.
One of the things I loved about Jim Brown was when it became clear to him it was inevitable that his record was going to get broken. It was either going to be by Franco or by Walter. He was
okay with Walter.
He openly rooted for Walter. Because he thought Franco ran out of bounds too much. He's like, I like Walter. Walter sticks guys.
Which as a Bear, we ate that up.
Yeah.
As a Bear fan, we ate that up because we love Walter so much. speaking for me, I've talked about this at length, how much I resented running backs on other teams, even though I had nothing to be insecure about because Peyton was better, but I really resented high-profile running backs on good teams like Tony Dorsett and Franco. And I just sort of just luxuriated in Jim Brown completely coming down on Peyton's side during that. He was really kind of a dick about it, if you want to be objective about it. You know, I got nothing against Franco now, and Jim Brown was a pretty big asshole to Franco, and he made no bones about it, which is kind of hilarious.
I'm sure the whole Steeler thing didn't hurt either. So I said it, and I paused before I said it, that Brown's the greatest player of all time. I was thinking because when they did the NFL 100 greatest players, he was the greatest player. And
Brown was?
Yes. And Bill Belichick was, of course, he's the greatest football player ever. You know, the historian, me, I don't think he's the greatest football player of all time. I think Walter Payton is the greatest football player of all time. I think Jim Brown is the greatest running back of all time. And the distinction is Walter could do everything. And mainly because he played for the shitty Bears, he got to do almost everything.
True. Did have him throw.
Do we think
passes.
Jim Brown could have led the NFL in punting? Because I'm pretty sure Walter could have.
Or he could have.
He could have played. Walter could have played wide receiver if you really needed to play wide receiver.
Jim Brown was a track and field star at Syracuse.
Well, yeah,
but obviously, running backs and linebackers are going to be your best athletes probably in the world to begin with. You're starting with that. At
the time, given the era he played in, his size and speed combination was ridiculous.
Yeah.
When you watch films of that, it looks like. Ooh, why is the high school kid playing in the junior high game? I mean, Jim Brown is just crushing everybody.
And Peyton was not an outlier like that. Peyton's thing was different. So, Brown was almost more like a paradigm. Peyton was the best football player. And what's interesting, I know this is anecdotal because you can't measure it, but in doing my Paul Brown research, and Paul Brown, he obviously appreciated Jim Brown, but Paul Brown was also a bit of an autocrat. But it was pointed out that Paul Brown did get on Jim Brown for his unwillingness or inability to block. And we know, no matter, not say that about fucking Walter Payton. If it want any proof, we talked about it last year. We covered Bears and Vikings, the Thursday night Jim McMahon game where he comes off the bench and throws 2 touchdowns. Folks, look it up. It won't take you but a second if you haven't before. And either the first or second of the 2 touchdowns, there's a blitzing linebacker that's got a straight line to basically knock McMahon out for another 7 weeks. And Payton fucking picks him up and just takes him out of there.
When you watch it, it's amazing that he could get there. You don't think there's any chance that he could stop that guy from obliterating McMahon. And not only does he get there, he knocks that guy on his ass.
He did. He wiped him out of the play.
The guy never touches Jim. He goes from going to kill him to McMahon hardly even knows he was there.
Peyton wiped him out.
And that was not unusual for not like we remember because it's famous. We don't remember because it's the only time he did it.
Correct.
He did that shit all the time.
And I think that's why he ultimately earned Jim Brown's respect, because as a running back, he would not only stay in for one more hit before getting knocked out of bounds, and he would never, like Franco, elect to go out of bounds before getting hit, but he would almost turn it on its head by himself being the aggressor and delivering the hit before, kind of being pushed out of bounds.
So a good example of that is, last week, Joe Burrow did the thing where it's a pretty savvy move for quarterback.
It was. And
he ran to the sidelines.
Astute for pointing it out.
And purposely stopped just on the white so that Robert Quinn would bump into him.
It was brilliant.
You would see Walter slow down by the sideline to get a defensive back to kind of let up, and then turn up the sideline and just knock that dude on his ass and get 4 extra yards. It was the opposite of Joe Burrow.
That's right. He would do that. That guy would fight for every goddamn last yard, man. And that's just him as a runner with the ball. He threw, like you said, partly because of the Bears' unimaginative offense, where they would try to bail themselves out by surprising defenses with a halfback option pass. He threw, 10 touchdowns, threw a lot of passes there, actually lined up under center under emergency circumstances, which we've talked about. He could punt. I don't know if he ever punted in a game on a quick kick or anything. But he could.
I think he did. So he must have, because we somehow knew he could punt.
Yeah, I know McMahon dropped a few third and 30-yard punts, but supposedly he could walk
punt?
He did, in fact. One of my all-time favorite moments that I'm sure I've talked about
Jim
before.
McMahon's greatest insults ever.
It's that
Theismann was criticizing him for punky QB shit, and he goes, I don't listen to criticism from guys who can't punt more than a yard.
Love it. Too bad. Were we playing the Washington national football team this year? We can. I don't know if we are. I don't think we are. All right. Anyway, but it was said that Peyton could walk the distance of the football field all 100 yards on his hands. Yeah. Again, I mean, I don't like. You can go down that path, and Jim Brown may have been just as good of an athlete because Jim Brown was a triathlete. But Jim Brown supposedly didn't block. We don't know what his receiving numbers were. He was kind of. I'm not going to knock Jim Brown, goddammit, because the gods will come get me. But he was a little bit relative to Walter, kind of one-dimensional. He was a great running back. Give him the goddamn ball, and he's probably nobody better. But all around, it's just a football player, guy in the field that can have impact. You put Peyton ahead of Brown.
And it fits into the narrative we had last year with the Lions, where he just one day quit. Literally phoned it in from a movie set and said, "Wouldn't come back."
Was he one of the? I think was he like one of the 6 youngest Hall of Fame? He's got to be if he retired after 9 seasons, right?
Yeah, pretty sure he was on that list.
He's got to be. It's fun. Had he hung around, he would have been on that 64 team, which remains the last championship that the Browns are in. And it was until the Cavaliers won in 2016, the professional title in all 4 sports, or 3 sports in their case, for Cleveland since then. But their 1964 is kind of what our 1908 was as Cub fans, and they haven't even made it back to the title game since then.
Jim Brown's second youngest.
After Gale,
and just ahead of Butkus, Earl Campbell, and Barry Sanders.
So Earl and the 2 Bears were just beat up, and the other 4. Or there are 3. Sorry.
Maybe they haven't updated this. Oh, they haven't, because Megatron pretty high on that list too.
I thought he was, but he's not a Hall of Famer yet. That's why.
No, he is. He just got inducted this year.
So
they haven't updated the list.
Okay.
Get on the shit, ProFootballHallOfFame.com.
We need to make our jokes.
There's a nice picture of Gale with his afro, though. So that makes
excellent. Excellent. So, the Bears and Browns head-to-head, just to tie a bow on it all and kind of maybe set this up for some memories I'm sure we do have, because they did play each other. Some games spring to mind. But, they were different. When the Browns came over in the NFL in 1950, of course, when they dominated this conference that Paul Brown helped start in 1946, the Browns' success almost itself basically ruined the league because they were so damn good. And, of course, they were so good that even though they were kind of like an expansion team or whatever, they dominated their conference in the NFL, which had been like the Giants' domain, and later it would be the Colts. But because they were in that other division, the Eastern Division, the Bears wouldn't regularly play them in the 50s and 60s. I don't know how the schedules worked then. They must have played a few times. You said they played 18 overall, so I don't know how many they would have played when they were both NFL teams. As opposed to being, inter-conference opponents, which, as we know, can only happen nowadays every 4 years.
What year was? I ask this every week. What year was the merger?
The merger was 1970 is the first official year. So the Browns were an NFL team in '69, but then an AFC team. So they were always an NFL team, but they were.
Oh, right.
It became an AFC team in 1970.
Yeah, so they played.
Which there'll be some parallels there between the Steelers too when we cover them.
They played in '69.
So that was just a chance intra-divisional NFL pre-merger.
Browns beat the Bears 28-24.
Was that at Soldier Field or?
That was at
Municipal.
69.
I'm sorry, Wrigley
yes.
Field. Wrigley Field.
Was that Soldier Field?
Sorry. Wrigley Field.
Wrigley Field, correct. Oh, I didn't. So the Soldier Field thing,
1971.
So the NIU Husky marching band got to play at halftime.
I saw that
because they were the first collegiate marching band ever to play at Soldier Field for a Bear game.
In 1971?
1975.
So they didn't have any bands.
What the hell did they do for the first 4 years? I thought halftimes back then were all probably high school bands or some shit.
I'm guessing it was bleak as shit.
Or it was...
And no frills. Hallis finally got it. thought he was getting into more seats.
I think Vag and Ed would come down and play bridge. Play a hand of bridge.
No,
and tell the fans who won, and then that was it. Ed would sing.
Ed would put on a cabaret show. Right? He would tickle the ivories, as it were. And
because they're celebrating
some Cole Porter.
It's funny that they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Bears at Soldier Field, while the Bears are actively trying to get out of their league.
Right, and they had already had to sink money into redeveloping. Because the old place was such a fucking dump. It's funny to think that they didn't have any frills, not even the most basic, not even like the Lane Tech marching band coming down. I got to ask my dad. I do know that, and I was telling a fellow this yesterday that I was at the Cubs game and I was sitting next to a fellow that grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, and worked at the Metropolitan Stadium, and he would watch the Vikings and and all that stuff. And I was going into the history of the Bears and my dad's perspective, having had been a season ticket holder for about 12 years at Wrigley Field in the upper deck, along third base, which was perfect, I think, to watch football. You're a little bit above, to be thrown into this oasis on the southeast side in this cavernous track stadium with no amenities and apparently no marching band, nothing around the stadium, which eliminated like the ritual that my dad and his buddies would have pregame and, meeting up. It was a sort of a violent, uprooting. And he would talk about it for years. Like, as a kid, I was like, hey, the Bears were great in the 80s. I love going to Soldier Field. I couldn't recognize objectively what a dump it was. But so I was always surprised that my dad would talk so negatively about it and wistfully about Wrigley Field. But now I get it. They didn't, like, those games must have been so depressing because they were a bad team, too, in the early 70s.
I mean, when you think about it, how did it make any sense that the state and the state basically built Comiskey Park? And they didn't build it for both teams. Because, I don't know. Well, because nobody wanted to share a stadium. Well, that's why they didn't do it. But the whole idea is if the state's going to build it, there ought to be more than one fucking team in it. Otherwise, Jerry should pay for it himself. Well, what's funny is that there was a trend of all those cookie cutter stadiums in the 70s that Richie Hebner once said, you're at home plate and you don't know if you're in Philadelphia, St. Louis, Cincinnati, or Pittsburgh. And they were multi-use stadiums, had no charm. But Comiskey was always considered the last of those types of stadiums before Camden Yards. So it is curious that if they were still going to go with that mammoth design, why they didn't do that. I mean, I guess maybe the McCaskies and Reinsdorfs weren't aligned. Well, neither one of them wanted to share. It would have been a quick conversation. It wouldn't have been hard to convince them to say no. You don't want to do this, do you? No. Okay, good. I don't either. Yeah, because the last duel. Somebody posted a picture of the last time we'll see the cutout of a baseball field on a football field, and that was 2 years ago when the
Oakland,
when the Raiders left. And the Raiders, part of the reason why the A's need a new stadium is the Raiders completely fucked that place up. They have that whole weird, huge thing they built in center field. They call Mount Davis. It's just this huge skybox, like nailed onto the side of it.
Is that a colloquialism, or is it officially? Did somebody officially call it Mount?
No, Davis? The A's bitch about it and call it Mount Davis because it ruined a big part of their park.
Pejorative. That's what Raiders do, right?
Yep, that's right. Just living up to the nickname.
Way to play to the part. So how many times did the Bears and Browns play before 69? How many more times? It's fewer than 5.
It's 5.
They're both in
51, 54, 60, 61, and 67.
Interesting. Okay.
And so Browns won 4 out of the 5.
Okay, yeah. Bears were mostly bad. Browns were still pretty good. Browns are really good, up until the merger, really, I think.
Bears kept it close a few times, though.
Hardland 64.
They lost 39-10 and 42-0 and 24-0.
Wow.
A big offensive outpouring in 51. They lost 42-21.
Wow.
Yeah, they didn't just lose. They got their ass kicked. This rivalry up until actually the Bears are very good against the new Browns. They were not good against the old Browns. They were 8-3 against the old, or 3-8 against the old Browns.
Okay. Before we finish with the new brow, or I don't know which direction we're going, but I do have a memory. The Bears' very first game after their Super Bowl, Soldier Field,
Yep.
September 1986. And this is why I remember this. I was watching it, of course. And as we've talked about before, the Bears always started off 4-0, 5-1, 4-1, for years around the Super Bowl. And it was also the first season of a real instant replay system, which we talked about this last year. And I remember finding a very insightful article. I can't remember who wrote it, and I can find it again, that had the whole history of instant replay that kind of filled in the gaps for me, although I just can't remember them again. It actually, they played around with it in preseason games going back to the 70s, but 1986 was really the first time instant replay was going to happen. And honest to God, the Browns get the ball to start the game, to start the 86 season. So there are like maybe 7 or 8 games taking place across the country. And they go, I want to say they go 3 and out. And on 4th down, the punt sails over the punter's head. There's mayhem. They kick it out. Nobody knows what's going on. And 4 plays into the new instant replay era, the very first. And this is not like in any way even almost related to today's instant replay. They had instant replay for a while until shortly after the Bears got screwed by it in 1991, and then it disappeared for a while. I can't remember when it came back. They've modified it, made it better, and it was really antiquated. But the very first play to be reviewed in an official capacity on instant replay in an NFL game was the Bears-Browns opening day 1986.
And so the Bears fumbled.
Was it the Bears that?
Yes.
It might have been the Bears.
Because here's why. This is great. So the scoring summary of the first score of the 1986 season is a gross fumble recovery in the end zone, Matt Barr kick, because the guy's name apparently was Al Gross. But they abbreviated it to a gross fumble recovery.
That's great.
But this is perfect Browns. So the Browns take a 7-0 lead. They're excited. Woo, here we go. Do you know what happened when they kicked off?
Nope.
Pinky ran it back 91 yards for a touchdown to tie the game.
I don't remember that. That's great.
Yeah.
Good old Dennis Gentry.
And
the Bears, I think, went going
Walter
away,
had
right?
Walter 2-yard touchdown run. And then Wilbur Marshall, 58-yard interception return for a touchdown to end the quarter. It was 21-7 at the end of the quarter.
Yeah.
But remember we talked last year about the weird 85 Bears-Bucks game early in the season where the Bucks scored 35 points against the Bears.
They scored 28 all in the first half.
Okay.
Yep, and the Bears won 38-28.
First game of the 86 season, Browns scored 31 points. Yep. Or I guess only 24 of them on offense, but
that's right. But still,
that was like a
I think I don't
couldn't blame that on Buddy.
And the Browns are actually a good team that year. Oddly enough, this is a rarity in the modern era. It's still old Browns, not new Browns, because I don't think this has ever happened.
Well, it's Bernie Kosar.
Well, the year before, they were a weak sister NFC Central winner against a weak NFC, and they went to the playoffs and very narrowly knocked off the Dolphins in a divisional game. It was a great game. I remember Don Rodgers, who eventually dropped dead a few weeks after Len Bias had some big plays in this game. When we were made aware of of athletes in crack, but they were not considered like a real good team, but they won a watered down division, almost upset the Dolphins. And the next year they did go to the title game, and this was the season in which the Browns actually got closer to the Super Bowl than the defending champion Bears. Yep. And had the famous 7-point lead with 2 minutes to go at home. Not the fumble, that was the next year.
That's right. This is the drive year.
The drive was 86. And that happened in Denver, but it happened in Cleveland. And that was the thing. Elway was backed up to his like 4. And there are all those, sausage eaters are going nuts with plastic pig snouts on their face. And Elway just shoved it up their ass. And the next year it was actually in Denver on the road when Biner fumbled. So in back-to-back years, the Browns lost to the Broncos in the title game in heartbreaking fashion, back-to-back years. It's pretty rough. And then coincidentally, when Elway insisted on getting humiliated for his 3rd straight Super Bowl following the 89 season, a Browns team, this time coached by Bud Carson, whereas Marty Schottenheimer had coached those 86 and 87 teams, was also Denver's last stop in the title game. So 3 out of 4 years the Browns were knocking on the door to the Super Bowl, only to have it answered by a horse-faced quarterback who would face his own humiliation 2 weeks later. So that was kind of their last golden era, right? Of Browns won.
Yeah.
Except for Bill Belichick was their last coach in Browns won, right?
Yes.
And their last playoff team.
And
the coach when they left town.
That was a coaching staff that had Bill Belichick and Nick Saban on it.
That's so Cleveland. Yeah, the greatest.
The greatest pro football coach, the greatest college football coach on the
coaching
same
at the same time. They're on the same. They're
fired
coaching
one,
at the same time.
Fired one for no good reason other than the fact that Art didn't like him.
Is that Belichick?
Yeah, and then didn't hire. Could have replaced him with Nick Saban. I didn't do that.
Now, in defense of I guess Art Modell, Belichick was a decent coach, but he was kind of a guy then. Still, I think in most people's eyes.
Yeah, but I doubt he got. Did he get so much better that when he got his Patriots job that all of a sudden he knew his shit? I have a feeling that you should have been able to tell, I think.
Well, none of it mattered. None of it mattered because once Modell pulled the plug in 95 and the Bears and the Browns should have otherwise played that year. I don't think they did because the Bears played the AFC Central, but I think that was because Jacksonville joined the league and for scheduling purposes, they took the Browns off. The Bears lost the Browns in 92. I remember watching that game, but I don't think they played in 95. But I remember how depressing it was that Modell announces that they're moving. They had, fan support, but Modell couldn't get a new stadium and whatever. You look it up if you're not familiar with all the tragedy of the Cleveland fans getting their team, taken from them. But because it was announced during the season, the fans stopped going and advertisers took their bill. It was really almost like this post-apocalyptic scene at Cleveland Stadium.
Well, the last game,
couple months of 95,
we're tearing seats out of the thing, throwing some on the field and keeping other ones. And
yeah, it was just a weird thing. And I get you're right. That closes the chapter on the Cleveland Browns, even though logically and how the Major League Baseball and the NFL had always done it up until then. They followed, the record should have followed to Baltimore, but because the outrage was so strong, the league decided to basically treat Baltimore as a expansion franchise. And I don't know if the decision was made right away, but the Browns, the current Browns, as you've mentioned a couple times, are technically an expansion team, but somehow the NFL has allowed the record keeping.
It happened because of
resume.
Ironically, it happened because of Baltimore. When the Colts went to Indianapolis, there was a lot of talk after the fact that they should not have been allowed to take the Colts logo and records with them. It should have started over in Indianapolis. So their next chance to actually do that was the Browns.
Coincidentally.
So that's why they basically had made the decision then that if an established team moves, they have to leave their records. So in a couple of years when the Arlington Heights Ponies start to play, the Bears will cease to exist until some expansion team moves into Soldier Field 3.
That's fun. Well, because now they've gotten carried away with it because I don't follow the NBA like I used to. But isn't there all right, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you follow the NBA much more than I do. But I'm trying to follow. Are there still Charlotte Bobcats? There's a whole what's the deal with New Orleans? There's something about
So
there was an NBA interruption like that, and they really played fast and loose with the
Hornets moved
records.
to New Orleans, and they started off as the Hornets. And then they rebranded, and they became the Pelicans. And then Charlotte got an expansion team, and they became
the Bobcats.
They became the Bobcats for the greatest reason ever. Bob Johnson, the guy who owned Black Entertainment Television, he was the opposite of Paul Brown. He named the team after himself. They were the Bobcats because his name was Bob.
The Bobcats, which makes it worse.
Yes.
It's just
and nobody liked the nickname or whatever. So when they sold to the group that eventually handed the keys over to Jordan, they asked and they were allowed by the NBA to bring the Hornets back.
So the branding, the merchandise, the records, and all that stuff for bookkeeping
they started
purposes.
right. They started over. Hornets 1 are in New Orleans. Hornets 2 are in Charlotte.
But
so
from a records perspective,
Larry Johnson, for all intents and purposes, is a Pelican If you
Yes.
looked up his records, he's not.
If they followed it like how baseball's always done it.
Right. Rex Chapman started off for the Pelicans, even though he never set foot in New Orleans.
Got it.
He's
But that's not how they keep it, though.
No, he would be in the he's in the Pelicans record book. He's not in the Hornets record book.
Oh, okay.
All they got was the uniforms back. They're still the
Okay.
Just to make things really confusing.
Yeah, Jesus.
But the NBA has the greatest example of why you should force teams to rebrand.
Utah Jazz.
Right, when the New Orleans Jazz moved to Utah and became the Utah Jazz.
Well, and let's be frank, the Los Angeles Lakers.
Right, same
I mean,
thing.
they're by a body of water, but they're from the Great Lakes, in the land of 10,000 lakes. So, yeah. So I think that we can close the chapter on Browns 1.
Yeah.
They kind of went out
because Browns 2 has 2 great games in Bears history.
They do. Oh, that's right. Well, I'm thinking of one right away. I'm not sure of the second one.
Yeah.
But it
second
was
second one. Let's say the Bears avoided something more than they did something. Yeah, of course. The one I think the game you're thinking of is the one I immediately thought of.
It's 0-1.
November 4th, 2001, in Soldier Field.
The same day that the Arizona Diamondbacks would win the World Series in walk-off fashion. Just wanted to connect those because I remember it was a very big sports day. And it was insane. It was the first time the Bears and Browns 2 were to play, because the Browns 2 came back in 99 and 01 was when the divisions would play each other. And they were actually pretty good in the third year. And they were pretty good early in that season.
They were 4-2 coming into the game. The Bears were 5-1.
And Butch Davis was their coach, was he not?
I believe
former Miami Hurricane coach. And the Browns actually continued to ascend after that season until they did make the playoffs, I think, around 03, 04, 05. But in 01, this game kind of spiraled them. It could, but it was the game that most Bear fans would remember was the game that ended in the exact same fashion as the week before.
But it's even more ridiculous because the Bears trailed 21-7 with 28 seconds to go in the game.
Even back up, if you're looking, are you looking at the game? Go back where it was 21-7, and the Bears had the ball, the possession before, and went for it on fourth down, like inside the 10, and didn't get it. And it was like, oh, this game's over. Like they had a legitimate shot earlier than the last possession, and it didn't. And they had to go for it on fourth because that's how it was. Probably under 2 minutes, but they did manage to get the ball back. Wait, it was 21-7, right, with 28 seconds, but They had another crack. And our guy, Shane
Matthews, game of his life, threw a 9-yard touchdown pass to Marty Booker. The Bears recovered the onside kick. And with no time remaining, as you would expect, he threw a touchdown pass to his halfback in the end zone.
James Allen.
This was not one where James Allen caught it, broke some tackles, and ran in. He caught it in the end zone.
Little guy. Laying on his back, too, sort of, I think, right? I'll never forget that. Obviously, it was absolutely bonkers, and that was just to tie the game.
Yes.
But it was so that's just getting an onside kick and a Hail Mary. Sometimes you get an onside kick and you have enough time to get 4 plays, it's a backbreaker. But it was like onside kick and we only have time now to launch the ball up. It was like 2 almost consecutive, right? I mean, I don't know if were there any plays between the onside kick and the Hail Mary, probably maybe 1 or 2, but I don't think they had. If they're 28 seconds when they scored the.
Well, it had to be at least 1 because I don't think they got the onside kick at the Browns 34.
No, okay.
So you're not allowed to advance.
That's right.
The onside kick if you're the kicking team.
So they made a play and somehow got the clock stopped.
Well, they just rode Shane's big arm.
Yeah. Shane was okay in 01. He started them. Miller took over. And he also showed up at a Circuit City on Elston Avenue, and I happened to be there for some other reason and decided to get in line and get my black and white glossy signed and gave him a fist bump, which seemed kind of new at the time. Yeah. Shane was down with it. Shane. That's a whole separate conversation, the 2001 Bears, but that was obviously when they beat the Browns. Well, we didn't finish the reenactment.
Right,
but,
so the week before – this was the second one, right? This is the second
another
of the 2?
Thrilling comeback. Not as instantaneous, but
well, the week before we had the satisfaction of Mike Brown taking the ball off of Terrell Owens' hands.
Absolutely,
and returning it for the game for the walk-off touchdown.
because Tio thought that Urlacher was going to take his fucking head off, which I think he was.
He was.
But that game was also a ridiculous comeback because the Bears needed 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions. They were actually down 16 points with, it's maybe 5 minutes left or whatever. And Matthews was the quarterback in that game. And it was one of the only times I remember David Terrell, who was a rookie and sucked ass and dropped the ball later against Detroit, but would absolutely have a huge catch in that game. But it was that was more of a drawn out, thrilling comeback, whereas the Cleveland one was a little more stunning because you were actually like, this game's over.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mike Brown catches that ball in the air that T.O. tapped up because he was afraid of getting hit by Urlacher. Brown runs it in for the walk-off. Flash forward a week. We get the onside kick, the Hail Mary. We're going to overtime again. Cleveland's got the ball. Was it Tim Couch?
Tim Couch.
Quarterback?
Goddamn right it was Tim Couch.
The first pick in New Browns history. But, yeah, so what happens in the second consecutive overtime, Andy?
Mike Brown, 16-yard interception return for a touchdown. And the game is over.
It's just so nuts when you think about how nuts is that we saw that.
But, it's the part that's not crazy is, if the Bears needing quick strike touchdowns and, the week before needing 2 2-point conversions, who better to draw that stuff up than famed Bears offensive coordinator John Shoop?
Yes. The Bears did go to the playoffs with John Shoop as their offensive coordinator. Yes, they did. So what's the other Browns Bears? That's all I got for Browns too, because I'm thinking, all right, 05 they would have been scheduled to play. That was the game that they lost when they started off 1-3, right after Chad Johnson humiliated Urlacher. 09, I don't have a memory. 13, I think they had a must win with Mark Trestman down the stretch, and they got it in December against them. So that was a win. 2017 was John Fox, so I blacked out. So what's the other game you're talking about?
That's the
2017?
big game. Because it was week 16, and the Bears were hosting the 0-14 Cleveland Browns. And the Browns, looking at their schedule, this was their chance to avoid going 0-16. And the mighty John Fox, it was only 6-3 at halftime, Bears. But in the third quarter, Jordan Howard, a 16-yard run, and Mitchell Trubisky ran for a 4-yarder. The Bears won 20-3, leaving only the Pittsburgh Steelers in the way. The Steelers, who had already clinched a playoff spot, started Landry Jones at quarterback, and they beat the Browns, and the Browns went 0-16.
I'd forgotten the Browns duplicated the 2008 Lions, which is so perfect.
But even better, the year after, they went 1-15. Is that right?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, Hugh Jackson. We're going to get to Hugh here in a second. We're going to go through the coaches.
Hugh Jackson is like climbing up the Ken Venturi ladder if he was actually the coach through the entirety of both of those seasons.
Yeah, Hugh was their coach when they went 1-15 and their coach when they went 0-16.
Ouch.
But he had a much more successful season, salvaged his record. He also went 1-14-1.
Holy shit.
Scratch that. Oh, I shortchanged him.
Different team?
13-1. Hugh Jackson career record with the Bengals, winning percentage of 0.88, 336-1.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. Has he coached since then?
No. He coached the Raiders before it, not after it.
I've always found it interesting that he spells his name H-U-E, like the color, or like my nickname, which comes from my last name of Donahue, as opposed to H-U-G-H.
Oh, he could be Irish.
He could be. Him and Shaq.
So the Browns have a lot of famous coaches. They're, of course, their winningest coach is Paul Brown. Right? Yeah, 158 wins, 48 losses, 8 ties. Lots of people like to ties.
He won Hallis.
He won 4 AAFC championships, 46, 47, 48, 49. 3 NFL championships, 50, 54, and 55.
He is
He
totally
won.
their Hallis.
He won 7 NFL conference championships, 50 to 55 and 57, whatever the hell that is.
Yep.
He was the coach of the year 4 times.
Yeah.
And he was succeeded by their second winningest coach in Browns history. Do you know who that is?
I don't offhand. Would I know the name?
You will recognize the name. I doubt you'd be able to picture him because I can't. Blanton Collier.
No, I don't even recognize the name.
76,
Okay.
34, and 2.
Yeah.
He
Well,
took
just
them.
all right.
Took them to the playoffs 7 times.
By the way, I just want to say that my dad would use it as an argument against Jim Brown that Leroy Kelly led the league in rushing in his first year in the NFL. Apropos of nothing. Disregard the fact that Neil Anderson fared rather well beginning in 1988. Carry on.
I did not know this. Maybe you knew this because he won Coach of the Year there. You know, Forrest Gregg coached the Browns.
What?
75 to 77. He was 18 and 23, but he was the NFL Coach of the Year in 1976.
Wow.
So that was pre-Bengals. So he went Browns, Bengals, Packers.
Yes.
I knew.
So
Bengals,
he somehow
Packers.
developed. He somehow wormed his way into Paul Brown's favor. Somehow.
Yeah.
He was an SMU guy. He was a Texan. So I wonder. Interesting. All right. Well, I learned something there. Forrest Gregg.
Forrest was followed by
Sam Rutigliano.
Sam Rutigliano.
Yeah, that's the first coach I remember. Really likable guy, and then we see him years later coaching at Liberty. Like, oh, he's a wacko. But I always felt bad for him because those are the Brian Sipe teams, and I don't know. Maybe it's my nature being a Cubs fan and like rooting for the underdog or whatever. But the Steelers were still kind of a menace even into the early '80s, I think, and they were and the Browns just couldn't get past them. But of course, really famously, they had a playoff game. And we talk about like the Minnesota Vikings having some real nut-crushing playoff losses, but under Sam Rutigliano and Brian Sipe, all-time franchise passing leader, they had a playoff game, divisional playoff game against the Raiders, who I believe ended up winning the Super Bowl. I believe it was the 1980 season. They were in the red zone and were only trailing, I think, by 2 points, maybe 14-12 or 16-14. So game's over, and Brian Sipe got intercepted in the end zone. Just had to get that on the record because it came to me. But that was under the great Sam Rutigliano.
So Sam has an odd distinction where he was the NFL Coach of the Year twice, and he has a losing record in his time in Cleveland. So the early years must have been bad. He was there for a while if he succeeded Greg in the late 70s because I didn't even 78 to 84.
Yeah, it's a long time.
So 7 seasons.
Because Schottenheimer came after him, I believe.
Yep. There's a gleam.
What's
There's a
that
gleam.
reference?
That's one of his weird pre-game speeches that the NFL films like to show.
I always thought he kind of looked a little bit like Larry King back in the 80s, but I don't know. On the sidelines, those big old 1980 style Sally Jesse Raphael glasses. He was the guy, but Marty was the guy that took them to those at least back-to-back AFC championship games in which they had their heart ripped out.
Yeah, he was 44 and 27.
Winning coach.
He won 2 playoff games. They were 2-4 in the playoffs. They went to the playoffs 4 times. And they won 3 straight Central Division champions.
85
and he was the Coach of the Year in 1986.
Yeah. Yeah, 86 was their best shot. It wouldn't have mattered, again, because you and I have spent so much time talking about this, we should probably write a book about the absolute singular dominance of the NFC in the 1980s, which, the Bears only get a seat at that table because their one season was so spectacular, but it was really the Redskins, Giants, and 49ers. Bears were kind of right there, and then even the Rams and Vikings were okay. So it wouldn't have mattered, really, now that I think about it. 30 years later, had they stuffed Elway in 86 or Binerhead, 86 or Binerhead and a fumbled in 87 because their fate could have been worse than what Denver endured. But they were, 86 was their best shot at making the Super Bowl, either Browns 1 or Browns 2. I mean, if Browns 2 even won a playoff game, they may have. They've made the playoffs since 1999.
They won one last year. They beat the Steelers.
Oh. And they okay. I wonder if did they have one? Okay.
It's their only one. They have only been in the playoffs twice since they were Browns too.
Oh my God.
They
so
went
they needed
once.
like
Butch took them in 1 year, and that was it.
Holy shit, I'm looking at it now. So new Browns are like, even if you look at that in a vacuum, as sad as the last 25, 30 years, and it wasn't even that sad. The Browns history is actually just so much distinctly worse in the last 20 seasons. I hadn't even really grasped that.
Well, here's a good way to put it into perspective. They have had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've had 6 non-interim coaches, some of whom have coached multiple seasons, who have fewer than 10 career victories with the Browns.
That's
6.
Incredible. Since 1999, since Browns too.
Yep. Starts with the first one they ever had. The great, I'm sure he's the son of Brad Palmer, the professor, Chris Palmer. Yeah, so after Schottenheimer, they had Bud Carson for 2 years, went to the playoffs once.
He took him to the title game and lost to Denver again.
He apparently quit or got whacked during the 90s
season. He gave way
season.
to Belichick, right?
Well, Jim Schaffner was the interim, and then Belichick took over.
Yeah,
and Bill, they were 36-44 in his 80 games, but they won the last playoff game they would win for a very long time.
In 94.
And then they were gone. They drafted Ray Lewis and whisked him off to Baltimore.
Oh, that's a great trivia fact.
Drafted as a Brown, never played for the Browns.
Drafted as a Brown. Wow. I'm still recovering from the fact that it was not a mirage to see that the Browns team that the Bears came back on in 2001 was actually a good Browns team, even though they were only in their third year of their post-expansion existence. They did, in fact, make the playoffs next year. And then you're right. It was freaking 18 years, and it required this COVID-enabled expand, although they were legitimately good last year, and they are now, but they, last year is their first playoff appearance in 18 seasons. So they basically, outside of that anomaly of a playoff appearance in their third season, is just immediately began setting new marks in futility.
Well, and it's funny, if you look at the psychology of the Browns, Butch Davis gets them turned around, and then they fire him. And when Butch was on their ascendancy is when the Patriots under Belichick started to kick everybody's ass. So they'd
already won a couple.
So their next 2 hires after they fire Butch are Parcells' assistant coaches, Romeo Crennel, and then Eric Mangini. They're basically trying to replicate the success that they thought they would have had they had A, their team not left, and B, they not fired Bill Belichick.
Right. Because Belichick, pre-expansion, pre-relocation, was the Browns coach. Okay. The hits keep on coming for Browns fans here.
Yeah. So Romeo was 24-40.
Okay.
The man genius went 10-22.
Who he himself was on his second stab because he had been the Jets coach the year the Bears.
And it is funny because there are still people who will cape for Mangini, saying that the Jets shouldn't have fired him. That he actually was a good coach. That his biggest problem was he has terrible people skills.
Okay.
That he's a good coach, but he has terrible people skills. He also has a terrible lisp, which was what made it hysterical when ESPN hired him. I'm like, what are you gonna do? Dub him? It's gonna be like watching a Godzilla movie, and Eric's mouth is gonna move, and somebody's gonna yell his lines from behind. That has nothing to do with anything.
The first thing I think of with Eric Mangini, and we're not playing the Jets this year, so I'll save it, or I should save it, but I'm not, is the year the Bears went to the Super Bowl. They played the Jets. Mangini was their coach. Bears were very good that year. They beat him, I think, 10-3, but Mangini tried to surprise the Bears by making an onside kick to begin the second half. Failed, and I think that was when the Bears threw the 60-yard touchdown to Mark Bradley and won. So that's the first thing I think of. But that was before he was the Browns coach.
But you're the one doing the Sopranos rewatch. I
am.
Have you gotten to the episode yet where I don't even know who it is. I don't know if it's Paulie. Somebody calls him the Man Genius.
Yes.
Which was his nickname, but it was hysterical to hear it during a Sopranos
Yes,
episode.
I've rebinged The Sopranos once. I'm actually listening to the Talking Sopranos podcast with Michael Imperioli and Steve Sharippa. They did come across that episode, and they did reference that. You're absolutely right. That Paulie made that reference. Yeah, I mean, because The Sopranos was on between '99 and '07, and it was towards the end because Mangini was their coach in '05 and '06, I think '06, '07. But he shows up. I mean, I don't even recognize some of these coaches. I mean, part of that's me becoming more disinterested.
Well, the next guy. You know Pat Shermer.
I know the name. Oh, okay.
He also was the coach of the Giants. He was an offensive coordinator for the Vikings. And he's currently Vic Fangio's offensive brain in Denver.
So he's a lifer. And I did recognize the name.
And there was Rob Chudzinski, former tight end. And Mike Pettin currently, he's not on the coaching staff. He's a special assistant to Matt Nagy, which I'm sure the reason he is when he was the defensive coordinator of the Packers, he outcoached the shit out of Nagy's offense 4 times in 2 years. Literally Christ. Made adjustments. On our old podcast, Kyle lost his shit one night. We couldn't hear him, I'm sure, because his internet was crapping out. Lost his shit about how Pettin is not that good a defensive coordinator, and that's proof that Nagy's a moron because he could never readjust to anything that Pettin did.
Oh, how depressing.
So they get rid of Pettin, and then they immediately think, oh, shit, maybe we shouldn't have, because that's when Hugh walks in. And, my God.
That is Venturi-esque. I'm looking at it. 15, 4. He was the coach. He 0-16, 1-31, 4-44. Oh, no, Patine was the coach for their 3-13 team. Yep. And Jackson got whacked halfway through the 2018 season, where they apparently turned it around with some coach Williams, who they didn't keep on.
Some coach. So that's Greg Williams, double G, Greg.
The headhunter.
Yes, the
bounty hunter.
The bounty hunter who had to serve a suspension.
He's the Joey Pants of of Midnight Run.
Yeah, and
he's paying the bounty hunters, I should say.
He was the defensive coordinator last year for the Jets when they were going to win their first game, and he called an all-out blitz against the Raiders, and the Raiders threw like a 70-yard touchdown pass on what would have been the second to last play of the game to beat him. He got fired for that. But people are like, Adam Gase fired him, the great Adam Gase. Or like, I thought you guys were trying to lose to get Trevor Lawrence.
Greg Williams took that team. I just have to jump on this because I happen to see it just going down the rabbit hole. But Greg Williams, as a head coach in that for the 2018 Browns team, he went 5-3, turned it around. You'd think, but Hugh Jackson. He went 2-5-1, and I only bring that up because Hugh Jackson was coming off an 0-16 season and a 1-15 season. How in the world was 2-5-1 not an improvement? Like, why did they decide to fire him then?
So the thing you have to remember about 2018, the Browns were on Hard Knocks, and Hugh, the whole world got to see what a moron he was.
Okay, but
and it immediately put him under. I'm sure there was pressure to fire him during Hard Knocks.
Did they need HBO to point out that they
needed HBO to make it public knowledge?
But he'd gone 1-31 as a coach. You have to almost make that assumption.
And so that Hard Knocks is amazing. The offensive coordinator at the beginning of Hard Knocks was Todd Haley. You remember Todd?
Oh yeah, a little bit of a psychopath.
Yeah. And then Greg Williams was the defensive coordinator. And then Bob Wiley, the old Bear offensive line coach, was he has this huge gut, and he was doing all this weird stuff. And he was saying to one of the players, I don't know why we do all this stretching. Have you ever see a lion stretch before it goes to chase?
He's one of those guys.
Yeah, he's one of those dumbasses. So then they bring in Greg, and he's just as nuts. And they go 5-3 to finish it. But Freddie Kitchens was. He became the offensive coordinator when they fired Todd Haley.
At that point, it had been their best record since 2007, 7-8-1.
So the owner was convinced that because the thing that turned around that season was really the offense under Baker.
Oh, okay.
And the idea was we're gonna pair Baker with his offensive coordinator Well, early on in the 2019 season, when Freddie takes over, Baker gets quoted as saying that they pull out a quote from Hard Knocks from the year before where he called Freddie an idiot. And Baker played it off we were just joking around. I called him like, hey, don't be an idiot. Not like you're an idiot. There's a difference. Well, Freddie was an idiot, so Freddie got fired. And then they brought in, but they could tell they were starting They had all those draft picks.
This is
actually
actually
starting to stockpile talent.
This is the origin story of the team that actually right now, unusually and or it should be overdue, but is actually a really good team.
Yes,
right.
And so then they hired Kevin Stefanski from the Vikings.
Yep. And they finally fucking turned it around.
And now they're
because if you're looking at the franchise encyclopedia, you're seeing something that you don't see with the Browns and you don't see it with the Bears is left to right, the season leader, passer, rusher, receiver. When you see Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, or Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, for 5, 6, that's when, and you're seeing Mayfield, Chubb, and Landry 3 years in a row. This year, so I got Njoku is currently their leading receiver, but yeah, they've got something going on after all the laughs we've just had at their expense and feeling better about our own sorry ass franchise, considering the disruption of their existence and just their general woefulness. Coincidentally enough, this franchise might actually be doing some shit.
All right, so I should have looked at these at the notes because these are pretty good. Forrest Gregg got fired with 1 game to go in the 77 season. Basically, get out of here. Go away. And then he went to coach.
All right. But I was coach of the year.
Sam Rutigliano got fired 8 games in the 84 season, and his interim coach was Marty Schottenheimer.
You're just making me jealous, by the way. More franchises that have had multiple elusive interim coaches.
Oh, no, the Bears will never have had. That's why the whole idea, if you're going to spend money on Matt Nagy to be the first coach fired, just take that money and light it on fire.
Yeah, no.
That's not
okay.
happening.
So interesting that Marty Schottenheimer, like Wayne Fonts, which makes it a little bit harder to detect immediately, went from interim coach to full-time coach and was actually one of their more successful ones. But I didn't know that he replaced Rutigliano mid-season. All right.
Butch Davis quit 11 games into the 2004 season. I don't know if he ran off to coach North Carolina. That's where he ended up.
Almost Bobby Ross-like, because they were coming off some rough times, but he'd taken the playoffs 2 years earlier. All right.
And it's funny because Kevin Stefanski is the first coach to win a playoff game under the new Browns, right?
Oh, that's right.
What was unique about it was he wasn't at the playoff game because he tested positive for COVID.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Mike Pryfer was the acting head coach.
Who
Stefanski came back for the game against the Chiefs and they lost.
It's funny because that wiped Bill Belichick from the Cleveland book. So at one point, Bill Belichick was the last coach to win a playoff game for 2 franchises. Yeah. So, but no more. Kevin Stefanski's there.
So that's quite an assortment of something.
Yeah, but it looks like their suffering might at least be alleviated for a while. They do have a good team, and I know you talked with Mike about the current teams. It's probably going to be ugly for the Bears, but
we could say because that one is already posted. We both picked the Bears to cover.
Oh, what's the line like? 12. That's it. Yeah, I might bet on the Bears there because I think Fields might post.
So, and we also had wondered if. For those of you who made it this far in the podcast, might as well tell you. So Mike and I recorded a podcast on Tuesday night, and we had audio problem that we didn't realize for the last half hour. So we just re-recorded it on Thursday. And so there's a point where we're both wondering if the line moved when they ruled Andy Dalton out.
And
it didn't. But what I think was had the Bears switched, said, hey, Dalton's healthy enough to play, and that line would have gone up.
It might have moved the other way.
It would have gone up. It would have been. I bet it would have been 10.5. I think now part of it is with the Justin Fields thing is I'm sure Vegas thinks it gives them a better chance, but it also increases the number of dopey Bear fans who are going to bet on the Bears to cover so they can hedge. They don't have to raise the line and get the same amount of action.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Huh. By the way, whatever that war equivalent metric that Football Reference uses called AV, I don't know how they arrive at it, but I'll just trust it for these purposes.
Greatest player of all time?
Brown
Craig
not
Krenzel?
Jim Brown.
It's Craig Krenzel.
It's not what no in the Browns' history is not. It's not Jim Brown.
Oh, it's Kevin Mack.
It is. It is Webster Slaughter. It was no. It's Clay Matthews. Apparently.
Oh, bullshit.
I know,
no.
right?
Yeah, well, it's a
How is it
lineman
not
who
Jim
played,
Brown?
or no, that was a linebacker. Bruce was the offensive line. So linebacker who played for 17 seasons.
Yeah.
So it's clearly he accumulated
Endurance.
that stat.
Yeah, because Brown only played 9 years. Well, so is War, I guess, too. The War is it can go backwards, but it is cumulative ultimately. It's. I'm just struck by the fact that these are two teams that have a very proud ancient histories that have been in the league for 70 years, and they've had so little interaction with each other. And they have like very similar sort of a founding presence, a sort of legendary.
That all ends now with, I would think, this is probably the Super Bowl matchup for the next 5 or 6 years.
Sure, yeah. It's pretty much Yankees, Dodgers, or
People will be
Steelers,
like,
Cowboys.
Can you remember there was a time when the Bears and Browns weren't going at each other every February? I don't.
Hard to believe.
Justin Fields and Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm impressed that I came up with Webster Slaughter. Like, I'm hard pressed to just come up with random Browns.
That's because most Browns are random Browns.
Right, like Ozzy's a Hall of Famer, Brian Sipe. I was rooting for those Browns.
Well, I mean,
teams
they had
that
that great run of
Kozar.
quarterbacks, just like the Bears. The Bears we tick off like. Did Krenzel ever play for the Browns? I don't know. He played for the Bengals.
No, but he went to Ohio State, so he's familiar with the streets of Ohio.
Craig Krenzel and Will Fuhrer and Peter Tom Willis and that stuff. They've got like Charlie Fry.
Oh yeah, good
and Derek Anderson and Deshaun Kaiser.
Well, and probably
they got a million. There's a million of them. They were same like the Bears. The 4 or 5 guys would play quarterback for them in a season.
Basically, just another
Brady
parallel. Quinn. On the negative, I remember Brady Quinn. I think they probably burned a high draft pick on him, right?
But he
drafted him.
He did the Aaron Rodgers thing without the excellence. He slid. He sat at the table and watched pick after pick after pick go.
Is that what it was? And I think they were obviously.
I don't think he went quite as low as, but everybody thought he was going like really early, and he was just sitting there.
God, I had high hopes for Brady Quinn when Charlie Weiss and his front butt came to town flashing the Super Bowl rings he'd basically ridden Bill Belichick's coattails on.
Well, he's handsome.
He was. And did I mention the front butt?
Yeah, he was he was not handsome, but Brady was.
Yeah, no, yeah, he was.
Still is. He's Mr. College Football now for Fox.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, 22nd pick. So it just almost exactly like Rodgers. The people had him, pegged to be with the Rodgers thing. The weird thing about the Rodgers thing was he was almost the number 1 pick. It was either him or Alex Smith. Then he doesn't go till like 23.
Yes, and then he sat on the bench for 3 years.
Yep. And then the one time he got in during those, so Favre gets hurt. But, of course, it's Brett Favre, so it's not going to be an injury that's going to keep him out. He's going to be back the next week. Rodgers goes out, breaks his foot during the game. His first chance to get a run as a quarterback, because Favre went out fairly early in the game. Rodgers is out with a broken foot.
Yeah.
Favre probably just went back in with a broken hand.
Yeah.
He'll just play left-handed. We were so close to never having to put up with the Aaron Rodgers era.
I know. That's the year we drafted Cedric Benson, 2005.
Well, the Bears weren't in the market for a quarterback because hadn't they drafted Rex the year before?
2 years before. The Tommy was the year before.
Oh, yeah. Well, that one they did all right with.
Yeah. Yeah, they did all right.
Yeah,
but,
the Tommy Harris pick is like the one time where a team... Actually... the Bears have done it a few times. They've tried it a lot of times. Remember Pat Riley? Draft the guy coming off the injury. Well, with Tommy, the whole thing was he's a great player, but because of it was his back, I think, right? Or his
knees, back, yeah.
He wasn't going to have a long career. And the Bears basically said, we don't care. Right. He's going to be great. Well, we have him, and he was. The problem was he crapped out. Like, they just needed to get like 2 more months out of him.
I know.
I shudder to think what he would have done in the rain
healthy.
to that Colt offensive line. But he wasn't around to do it. We had Tank Johnson instead. The other guy would be they got Eddie Jackson in the 4th round because Eddie had a broken foot the year before in Alabama. It was the only reason he was still there.
And for a couple of years, then in that case, that actually worked out. But yeah, that's a risky.
Oh, Eddie's back.
Wow.
Eddie's back. Forced a fumble, tackle for a loss last week.
Yeah.
He got tired of me berating him, and now he's going to be back to All-Pro.
Yeah, I can't wait. With bated breath.
But yeah, I mean, we could do a whole thing on terrible Bear and Brown draft picks, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, because I'm wondering how many busters, like Tim Couch has to be considered a buster. Like, how many quarterback busters did they have? How many running back busters did they? Because we had, like, quarterbacks, Bears busters, just off the top of my head. You know, I'm not going to call Grossman a buster because he took him to the Super Bowl, but, McNown, you could almost call Harbaugh a freaking buster. He's a first-round pick. Running backs, though, Rashawn Salam, Cedric Benson, Curtis Enos. I mean, some all-timers there. At least Salam got 1,000 yards. Enos and Benson was Enos was really the worst. But and you know, I don't know if you can't even consider Trubisky a bust at quarterback because he's amongst the franchise leaders.
All right. So do you want to hear the
passing yards?
I'm tempted to just go. So yeah, I'm not going all through all these guys. Milt Plum, of course, a great quarterback for them for many years.
Sure.
Frank Ryan, Mike Phipps. There's a good Bear
future
Brown
Bear
connection.
Yeah, part of that troika.
He was succeeded by Brian Sipe.
Phipps the Bears. And then
Gary Danielson. They had a lot of Bernie Kosar.
At the end of Danielson's career, they had a pretty good run there then between Sipe and Kosar. I'm surprised Kosar didn't play long enough to surpass Sipe. He's got to be close.
Well, part of that was Belichick first benched him and then cut him for Vinny Testaverde. That actually was a big part of why Belichick got fired. It was part of why he was so unpopular.
Because Kosar was incredibly popular.
Problem was Vinny played well for them.
Yeah,
kind of ruined.
Vinny had figured out his color blindness or something and was actually turning it around.
Well, the color blindness thing. So to me, that was. I remember this as not as a kid.
You talked about it.
The fact that the Bucks home uniforms looked like the other team's road uniforms.
Yeah, it's an opposite. They create.
He couldn't tell the difference because that light orange was basically the same color. So that's great. You draft this guy number 1 overall. Change your fucking uniforms.
Yeah.
So when they come back, this is when the quarterback bums really show up. So they start with Tim Couch and Ty Detmer as his backup.
So Couch really had to be a buster. He was the first pick in the draft.
Then Tim must have got hurt his second year because it gave a lot of starts to a future Super Bowl winning coach. You'll never guess.
McVay? No, he doesn't want a Super Bowl.
No, it's when he didn't play in the NFL.
Sean Payton? No, he played in the NFL. Oh, wait, what?
It's a relatively recent Super Bowl winner, and he was a former quarterback. Probably best known as a Brett Favre backup.
Brett Favre backup, like not Mark Brunell. Lay it on me. I'm missing
Doug
something
Peterson.
Obvious. Oh, yeah, of course. Peters, yeah.
So then Couch comes back. He got to start all 16 games in 01. Then Kelly Holcomb.
I remember Kelly Holcomb.
Holcomb played in a playoff game against the Steelers when Tommy Maddox went nuts and the Browns blew another lead and the Steelers won. That was been their
talked about that. That was the Carson Palmer. No, that was the Bengals. My bad. I'm sorry. So Holcomb was their quarterback in their first playoff appearance. So Couch was hurt. Okay. Couch had to be hurt, or did they already give up on him? Because that was 2004. That would have been Couch would have otherwise been like a 26-year-old.
2004, he was gone. Jeff Garcia was their primary quarterback that year.
I remember that.
And the great Luke McCown, Josh's brother.
But not related to Cade McNown.
Then they gave Trent Dilfer a spin. He split time with Charlie Fry. Then Derek Anderson split time with Charlie Fry. Then they did it again.
Yeah.
Then 2008, they had a Bear-like season where 4 guys started at quarterback. Derek Anderson, Brady Quinn, Ken Dorsey, and Bruce Gradkowski.
Another MAC quarterback. They had a couple MAC
Did you remember that Jake Delhomme played for them in 2010?
Nope.
Nope, nobody remembers that. Jake probably doesn't remember that. Colt McCoy and Seneca Wallace.
McCoy.
Brandon Whedon from Oklahoma State started 15 games for them in 2012.
Was that the year they went like 1-15? I don't know. All right.
No, that was
I was just
the
curious.
Deshaun Kaiser season.
Oh, yeah. 2012, they actually.
Then they tried Colt McCoy.
5-11.
Still playing in the NFL. When Colt McCoy, Jason Campbell, future Bear.
What year?
Or no,
was this?
13.
Yeah, former Bear.
Former Bear.
He was the Bear.
Right.
The
Was that
year
between
before.
Washington, Oakland, and the Bears?
Yeah, sure.
Brian Hoyer got 3 starts.
That was a future Bear now at this point, but another from today's perspective.
Brian Hoyer
Bear.
started 13 games in 2014. A guy who started 2, Johnny Football. Johnny Manziel.
They had Manziel. You know what? We almost ended this podcast without mentioning Manziel, another infamous, ignominious draft pick.
Then 2015.
Well, that's another one of their quarterback busts, too.
Luke McCown's brother started 8 games. Josh McCown.
Former Bear. So wait a second. 3 straight years in a row, their leading passer was a former or future Bear. I'm seeing a lot of the parallels are not a coincidence.
I'll tell you why you don't win much. Listen to this bunch. 2016, Cody Kessler, Robert Griffin III,
RG3,
or as they call him on the Dan Patrick Show, Robert Griffin Jr. III, because one of their callers called him that one time. Robert Griffin Jr. III, and Josh McCown, and then Kevin Hogan got 1 start in the winless season. Deshaun Kaiser got the other 15. And then 2018, things calmed down.
Yeah, the laughs come to an end.
Yep.
They are
Tyrod Taylor started 3 games. He's not Tyrod anymore.
Even if they step on their dick going forward, this is no matter what. This is the golden age of Browns 2 and football.
Because Baker Mayfield has now started every game in 19, every game in 20. He started 13 games in 18, and now he'll start his 3rd game on Sunday.
Okay, so basically, Sunday,
even though for all the world it looked like he separated his shoulder, tackling a guy in an interception last week. He limped off the field with his arm pinned to him, and he came right back.
Yeah. Well, they might have something, and it might push them ahead in this decades-old sort of taffy pull amongst once proud franchises that just can't get out of their own way. Looks like Cleveland might be pulling ahead, and they can demonstrate that on Sunday.
So by the end of this season, if he stays healthy, Baker Mayfield will move. This is amazing.
How close to Sipe?
So they'll play 13. By the end of this season, Baker Mayfield will have started the 5th most games at quarterback in Browns history.
And that's total Browns.
The guys ahead of him, Brian Sipe, Bernie Kosar, Frank Ryan, and Otto Graham.
Wow. That's not that we needed any further punctuation on the similarities between these 2 franchises, but that's certainly
but unless catastrophe hits, you're about to see a Bear quarterback do the same thing.
Yes,
Justin Fields will.
So.
Hopefully, he stabilizes the position for the next 15 years. If he's blows through everything.
Yes. Cutler proved it was not a high bar because Cutler was good, but so maddeningly inconsistent and disappointing, and he stayed upright enough is all it took. All you have to do is stay upright for 5 years, and you will be the next Bears all-time leading passer.
I would
5
like
years all takes.
I would like a time if I've had time to use it for a lot of better stuff than this, but one of the things I would do is I would go back and I would make sure that Mike Martz never became the offensive coordinator for the Bears.
Do you think he fucked them up? Because that was the one year they went to the title game,
They were running an offense that had passed its usefulness like 4 years before. And they got rid of Greg Olson. They just did a lot of weird personnel stuff that set them back after Martz left. They've gotten rid of solid players, and they didn't have enough of them. The other thing they did under the whole Lovey regime, as much as I like Lovey, the priority was always defense, always.
Yeah.
Even when they make the trade for Cutler,
when
they
Jerry
still
Angelo made the splash.
Yeah, they didn't.
They drafted defense.
I mean, it took them a long time, and then they finally went out and got Brandon Marshall, who brought his own baggage, and that was probably destined to be a short-term success before he had to go. Paired him with Alshon.
And yet, even in those 3 seasons, Brandon Marshall came so close to becoming the Bears' all-time leading receiver.
If he played out his entire,
if he kept his head,
because he had one more year on the contract when they traded him, right? Or they just cut him. I can't remember the NFL does all kinds of weird
I'm
shit.
going to look it up because
he would have left as the all-time leading receiver. It would have been 4 years, right?
It would have been he played for the Bears because we know that that Johnny Morris is just over 5,000. Brandon for the Bears was 3 years and 3,524 yards, so over 1,000 a year. Had he played 2 more years, which
5 years, he'd be the all-time leader. Well,
yeah.
And so I don't want to be redundant, but I like this, so we're gonna talk about it again in this one. So if Allen Robinson plays this year and next year, he will become the all-time leading.
Oh, is that right?
Receiver.
Good, because he's probably the best receiver for the Bears I've ever seen.
So what Pusteri and I were talking about during the preview podcast for the Browns was him dropping the touchdown pass from Fields. It was a perfect pass. Yeah. And so I ticked off. I said, you can't blame Allen Robinson. It's the first perfect pass that's ever been thrown to him, and maybe in his lifetime. We don't know who his high school quarterback was, but we know his college quarterback was Christian Hackenberg. And then we know his quarterback with the Jags was Blake Bortles. And then we know that his quarterback with the Bears was Mitch. This is the first time he's ever played with a real quarterback.
Okay. All right. Yep.
So it's going to take him a while to get used to the ball actually being where it's supposed to be.
He's put up some numbers, but I got you because this season included both games, he's at 3,210 yards. So he should be over 4,000 by the end of the year. We don't know what's going to happen with his contract, but if he's managed to be around next year, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
get an extra game, so you should be. He should have.
Well, if Fields he could do it this year, Fields really goes up.
Oh, I already did the math. He'd have to break Megatron's record.
I feel what's a single season yardage record? What is this? Is it over 2,000 yards? I don't even know, and I'm kind of embarrassed.
It's 1964 or something.
Okay. So it's not as much as a single season rushing record, but it's not even 2,000. So yeah, he's not going to do it this year.
Well, no, he could, but he has to average like 150 yards.
Well, he's got to set the single season record with a rookie quarterback who we're all very optimistic about. But
yeah, I don't really.
Yeah. That's where we're at. That's Johnny Morris with his barely 5,000 yards, still being our all-time leading receiver. I know Cleveland's got their tight end with a little bit more, but they're equally embarrassing.
Yeah, I was right. All-time record is 1,964 yards.
Interesting.
Kelvin had to average 123 yards a game to get it. The year before, he gained 1,681 yards.
God, he was incredible. I know they're playing the Lions next week, and I don't know what we're going to be doing, but it never gets old to point out how the Lions just wasted so many great years from so many great players. But that's a topic for another day, and we've talked about it before anyway. So gotta remember we're talking about the Browns.
The Browns. It's great to have a franchise that we can
have a little bit of a cushion below us 2 weeks in a row. Because what I learned last week was
3 weeks in a row.
Part of the reason I like doing this is that I'm always humbled that people like to listen to it. Some do, and it's therapeutic for me. But I also learn a lot, and I never quite appreciated for the Bengals were so obviously one of those teams that have had a worse history than the Bears. There's more than you would think. It doesn't take away the pain that we've had to endure, but it is fascinating that there's so many teams that have been worse historically. And because the Browns haven't even been to a Super Bowl, they clearly are on that list. Yeah. So,
well, I mean, I think the thing that's made it worse for Bear fans is it's not just the lack of Super Bowls and that kind of stuff. It's the fact that while the team we hate the most has had 25 years of Hall of Fame quarterbacking.
Yeah.
We have had the worst assortment of quarterbacks in NFL history.
I think worse than the Browns even. I don't think it's even worth going
we don't have a team. If Jim McMahon played as long as Bernie Kosar, then the Bears would clearly be better situated. But he didn't. He only played a handful of seasons. And
it happens.
And so we don't have the equivalent of – and Bernie, that's not a huge bar to clear. Well, Bears can't clear it. That's how low it is. We can't get over it. So.
Yep. Someday, perhaps.
All right. Well, until next week.
You got it.
Many of us have herpes.